So, you mentioned being in business for 60 years. Has that always been in the debris kind of range, or?
Yeah, there were two other companies before us in the whole world, so we were the third company in debris boxes in the whole world.
Oh, wow.
And first in Marin, and so a lifetime of it.
Uh-huh.
Also did demolition for a number of years, and just got old. Don't do it much anymore.
Right. Yeah, I talked with you. The last person you mentioned was a trucker and hauler. He said he retired from demolition. What's his name? He has 2 trucks and does some hauling, but doesn't do demolition anymore.
Mm.
I told him you'd refer to me.
Was that, yeah, was Mitch, was it? Or was it Bobcat Bob?
No, it was another guy. You gave 3 names, and I called Mitch. He didn't answer. But the last name that you gave, I think it's Terry.
Darcy.
Darcy Evans, yeah.
Yeah.
So
he's not doing much anymore?
He's not doing much demolition.
Oh, yeah.
He's just doing hauling stuff. And Jen didn't want to hang out for our interview, so she's going to.
Yeah, I've been working on those.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Thank you.
I'll give you a call when we're done.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so he said he thought he might be able to help by, he has a dump truck where the lid or the back end flips all the way up quite high.
Yeah.
And so if he goes nose down the driveway and raises the bed a little bit, I should be able to pluck them out of the back with excavator with good visibility once he raises his tailgate.
Why don't the other option is that you just get any 10 wheel, and what they do is they have chains on the tailgate, and they hook the chains and then just let the tailgate flop down, and it's the same thing as
Okay. That's pretty heavy though. How do they get it up to, I guess, with equipment?
Well, you can also push it up. I mean, what it does is it's hinged. There's a lock on the bottom. Ordinarily, it's hinged on the top, and there's a lock on the bottom. And the lock on the bottom opens, and then the gate swings out, right?
All right.
Now they leave the lock on the bottom, and they take the pins out of the top so it falls down the other way.
I see. That's okay. I think that's even better than.
Yeah, because then you got one with sideboards.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that. So, what have I know that you know a tremendous amount in this field because you're involved with real estate and you've been around both the political and like back when you started 60 years ago. Were there any homeless people in the room?
No.
So when did now there's 2,000 and growing.
Yeah.
And when did you first start to see homelessness occur?
Well, when they say they weren't homeless, there were hippies in those days, and the hippies were by choice homeless. That was a different kind of movement.
Yeah.
And so the hippie movement went by, but they kind of opened the door to sleeping out in the park and all that kind of stuff. And then there was a period of time between the end of the hippie movement and
when did the hippie movement start in Marin?
I was in high school, so that would be in the late 50s and throughout the 60s, I guess. I'm guessing.
All right. And was there any problem with it in terms of, I think of just human well-being? Do people have a safe, legal place to sleep, enough food, medical care, are able to feel like they have some useful role in the culture? At what point did you see problems starting to emerge? Was that in the hippie period, or was that?
Well, the hippie was all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? That was a whole different thing. That was the love years,
Yeah.
and that wasn't you know, they slept in the park because of choice and because of the activities that were going on there. So that was a whole different thing. Then when that went away, there was a period that there wasn't, I can't recall any homeless, so I'm gonna guess, I'm just guessing at these, but let's say the hippies were the 50s to the 60s, through the 60s, maybe even the first part of the 70s, and then let's say that there was a period of time in the 70s when there wasn't any that I can remember homeless, except that we built a lot of our debris boxes down in Sausalito, and the Sausalito, I wouldn't call them hippies, I'd call them anchor outs, which were just another form of hippie and another form of homeless, but they're not really homeless because they have boats that they live on out in the bay. But
That's a homeless.
it's a homeless. Well, there was a kind of an interesting thing that happened then. The ships have those lifeboats that they lower over the side that they're on the hooks.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, somehow there was a lot of those that got salvaged, and they bought those. A lot of those folks bought those cheap, and then they built houses on them. So there were a lot of those that floated around. And we used to, if somebody was tearing off a shingle roof, we would haul the shingle roof down to them and dump them, and they would take the shingles, turn them around backwards, and re-shingle that side of a boat and live that way. And so that was another form. I'm not gonna. When I say homeless, to me, I don't know how to define it. Hippies were by choice. Those folks, the anchor outs, were by choice. They both may or may not have had a lot of money. I don't know.
And a lot of that was a choice too.
And that was it was a lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's a little bit different. When did the kind of hippies that we have now, which are not subscribing to either the beat generation or the anchor outs, come around? Just plain the people that I think, and I'm surmising this because I haven't ever thought it out this way before, but it's kind of interesting that I'm thinking it out this way now. It's kind of the entitlement stage is where we're at now.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of in those days they didn't have all the benefits to somebody that didn't want to work.
Uh-huh.
Now you can come out unless you're making a lot of money, and money isn't important to everybody. But unless you're making a lot of money, you're better off not working.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can make more money not working.
And that's also interesting. Have you ever been to Denmark or Sweden?
Yeah.
Okay. Because when I interviewed people in Denmark, I interviewed 30 random people on buses and parks and various things to get, and every single one of them was college educated.
Yeah.
Every single one of them was in a job that they not only worked at, but they liked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every one of them liked their country.
Yeah.
And every one of them had health care.
Yeah.
And every one of them said that pretty much no matter what happened, their basic survival, security, etc., would be tended to.
Yes.
And I drove around Copenhagen and took the train, and I saw, on average, a 400% higher quality of life.
Yes.
And they get paid $1,000 a month to go to college. And they get paid unemployment benefits that are pretty close to what they're getting if they work.
Mm-hmm.
But they were all working, and they were all doing something that they loved.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what if you get bored with your job or you have a bad boss, and what then? And they said, well, we stop working at that company and get paid pretty much what we were working. We get retrained in something that we like more or are better at, And when we find the right fit, we go back to work and make pretty much what we did before. And they were all working, and they were all in jobs that they liked.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what happens, if someone's sleeping under a bridge? And they said, well, someone in the city will go out and give them a key to an apartment and said,
I didn't know that.
you want to move in?
Yeah.
And I said, so you're not getting more money to work than you would not to work. So I said, why are you working? They said, well, we like our job. And what I concluded is that we have the worst of both worlds here, because we have, I think 70% of Americans don't like their job. 100% of the Danish people that I interviewed did.
Oh, interesting.
And so 100% versus 30%. And what it occurred to me is that people like doing stuff that they're good at with people that they like, that contributes meaningfully to their own growth and the growth of their country. And they care about countries that care about them.
Yeah.
And so if you ask the typical American, how much do you think their government cares about them?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'd say 3 out of 10 if I was asked that question.
I would think so.
3 out of 10. Because no branch of government, no representative at any point in my entire life has ever showed an interest in gathering the data about what does and doesn't affect my well-being, or thought to do anything about that data. So the obvious conclusion is they don't care that much about me. If they did, the first step would be to say, how are you doing in these areas and these areas? What can we do to help? And then respond and be helpful. And since nobody has ever done that, despite paying up to 50% of my yearly income in taxes, much of which is not spent as I would spend it, I have to conclude that they're much more interested in their own careers and stuff than they are in mine. And so my government doesn't care that much about me. Therefore, I'm not as loyal to my government as the Danish people, who have been provided excellent health care, paid to go to college, encouraged to study stuff they love, encouraged to train for jobs that they're good at, supported to finding the right fit. These people love their country because they have, and they're given paid maternity leave for both parents. The most staggering thing when I asked the Danish, because I had heard about the 80% tax bracket. So I'm paying 50%, they're paying 80%. And I thought they would be furious, because I'm annoyed at paying 50%.
Sure.
And so I thought they would be furious. I asked every single one of them, do you mind these high, roughly 80% taxes? Every single one of them said, no, we do not mind it. Because, we're not lacking. Our children have great educations. We have wonderful places to live. We understand that this quality of life is expensive and that the government's paying a good chunk of it. And we've got, and they have a lower work week, it's like 37 hours or something.
Mm-hmm. And they also get long vacations, don't they?
They get longer vacations.
Yeah.
And so my conclusion, based on watching them, and it made sense to me, was that overall, a Danish person has a 400% higher probability of having a much better life, than an average American. And the most striking thing of all, Fred, was that they're not anxious. Do you get anxious?
Do I get anxious? Well, by what? I mean, I get
stuff in life. You notice that dealing with anxiety is something you have to deal with in life in general?
Oh, yeah, I get anxious every day.
Yeah, I get anxious every day.
Yeah.
Now, what was interesting to me,
I got anxious this afternoon when one of our drivers tipped over a box.
right.
Yeah.
So, and part of it is, America is one of the most litigious countries in the world.
That's right. That's right.
And so you've been working for 60 years, but conceivably, a few people out of your control could set in motion a series of events that you could lose a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Now that's scary,
Yeah.
in part because our culture says that we're worth what we've accomplished. So if someone erases that, then our worth goes down
Yeah.
as human beings in this culture. So anyway, I was stunned that nobody was anxious the way the typical American is anxious.
Yeah.
And it's because their survival, their security, their love and belonging, and their self-esteem is institutionally maintained at a very high level. And so they're actually more proactive and visionary, meaning they think, what kind of job would I really like to do? And then they go and study, and then they take time finding a good fit, and then they get good at it because they like it, and they like the people they're working with. And so they're more productive in contributing, and they don't resent it. So that's one model that I think works better just based on raw evidence. Meaning I concluded that if I had been born in Denmark, I would not be as anxious, and that my life would be 400% higher quality than the average American, and probably twice as high quality as my life today. And I consider myself relatively successful. I consider you relatively successful. You've got a lot more assets, but I've always, I take 3 or 4 months a year off, and that's been my number one thing. And I couldn't do that if I ran a company like this.
I work 7 days a week, but I like it.
Exactly. So we're both, doing the kind of things that we like, and yet I was very impressed by everyone I spoke with in Denmark. And the one problem I could find in the culture was the darker side of drugs, whether it was heroin or something. There was a Crystal Mas or something town or whatever. There was a place where everyone knew addicts kind of hung around there. And they had not, I think they had, it wasn't a crisis. I mean, everyone knew that people went there to do drugs, and everyone knew that the lifespan and quality of life of someone doing those drugs was not as good as if you didn't.
Yeah.
But if they needed medical care, they had it.
Yeah.
They weren't being carted off to prison at $100,000 a year, which is kind of funny because when we punish someone for smoking marijuana or something, we're also punishing the entire culture who has to pay $100,000 a year.
Right.
And so, I started off feeling more like what I heard you talking about earlier, which is that the people are basically lazy. If you give them an out, they'll take it. Until I went to Denmark and discovered that none of them had a financial incentive that made much sense to go to work. But if they could do something they loved and were good at with people they liked, they not only wanted to work, they were all working, meaning I didn't find an unemployed person in my sample. And so you brought an interesting story to light with how they're dealing with homelessness in China. But what did you think of the Denmark kind of experience? Because that changed my view.
Well, I think that people are influenced by their peers,
Yes.
and I think that the peers in Denmark and in Sweden and in those countries have a philosophy that are somewhat not unique to them, but as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of difference between the Mexican culture, for example, and the further south culture. I mean, they're different. They all relate to their families, but
Yeah,
they
yeah.
have different loyalties to their work at different places. Now, that said, in the U.S., I think we have. Now, this is going to make me sound real rednecky, but I believe it, so there it is. What Gorbachev said
Mm-hmm.
when he said that the United States can't be, we'd like to defeat the United States, but we can't militarily. We have to do it from within. That introduces possibly an element or a dimension. I don't think they want Sweden. I don't think that if that's really happening, and I don't know whether it is, but if that's really happening, then
What's really happening?
Outside influences influencing our culture,
From
which
within.
is from within.
Uh-huh. And so this would be the Russians, or
Well, whoever they are. I mean, I don't isolate it as the Russians. I say that the whole communist regime wants to do what others have done. I mean, at one time Germany wanted to be the whole world, right?
Mhm.
And another time the Russians wanted to be the whole world. I mean, the Rome wanted to be the whole world. I mean, at different times, different cultures have wanted to dominate, conquer and dominate.
do you think the U.S. has wanted to conquer and dominate?
They have the opportunity to, and the fact that they don't per se makes me think not. But they certainly have had the opportunity after World War II. I mean, they won the war. They had all the equipment. They had all the planes and all the ships and the tanks and the soldiers, and they had all the soldiers that they conquered, so they could take over the rest of the world easily if they wanted to. But they didn't. And what did they do? They backed up and rebuilt the areas that they destroyed.
Yeah, the Marshall Plan seemed like a better strategy than the first time around.
Yeah.
Because it speaks to the fact that it's hard to have good relationship with someone who's in crisis.
Yeah.
And so when you rebuild and reinvest in the other person or the other country, you can have a higher probability of peace than if one person or one country is, unable to meet its survival and security needs.
Right.
And so the hippie kind of wave came and went. Now, were you critical or enamored by, like, what was your response to the hippie movement and then the boating movement? Could you relate to why these people lived the life that they did? And
I relate to them, but more intrigued by them. I never forget, in Sausalito there was a boat called it was a ship called the Spreckles House. It was a 4-story house on a big wooden barge, and we tore that down. And alongside of us was another houseboat, and on the other side was another houseboat, and both of them had decks up top. Both of them had these ladies that were up there sunbathing in the nude. There was a lot of nudity then. And we're down there in the mud trying to tear up these boards, and we're saying, who's enjoying life?
Yeah, right.
What are we doing?
Yeah.
But, did we want to go take our clothes off and go up there and do that? No, I mean, not really. We had different set of values, I guess. We had to hurry up and get a job done, I guess.
Right. Where did your work ethic originate? Was it
Easy. My work ethic originated because I was raised on a farm up in Napa Valley. You heard of Stag's Leap wine? Stag's Leap.
I'm not a big wine
Okay.
drinker.
Well, Stag's Leap is a pretty famous wine brand. That was my family's ranch. So when you're a farm boy out on a ranch, you haven't got playmates. You know, the next playmate was 5 miles that way.
Yeah.
And so what do you have? You have animals like this little guy, and you have chores.
Yes.
And so that's what you get used to. Then my father died. We came to Marin, and when we all had guns and horses and all that kind of stuff. When we came here, and the guys my age were playing marbles. You know, it's different, altogether different.
Marbles?
We shoot yeah, when we came here. In Napa County, I went to Napa. Okay, so the grammar school goes to 6th grade up there. 7th and 8th and 9th, I think, was then high school, and then like 10th, 11th, 12th was JC. I think it was something. I don't remember the numbers, but something like that. So it was a different system. So here they go to the 8th grade in grade school. There they went to the 6th grade in grade school. So I left a high school and came back to a grade school. And that's why I say when in the grade school, the guys that I knew were just more grown up children.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting. I'm going to change this closer to us. There's an interesting cultural phenomena that Robert Bly wrote a book called The Sibling Society, and in it he talked about the way that we've started to raise grown-up children in this culture. And I guess children would have a certain amount of entitlement because a child is entitled to parental protection, but if you don't grow up, then you feel entitled to be treated like a child by your government.
Yeah.
And I wonder. I think some of that is how did you become an adult? I mean, your body, of course, everyone's body grows up.
Yeah.
But you noticed you were surrounded by a lot of children your age.
Yeah.
Why do you think you became an adult and they didn't?
Well, they became adults obviously as time went on, but I didn't mix with them.
I see.
And first thing I did was there was a tree service cutting down trees down the street from where we moved at, and I wanted to go out and help them with a chainsaw. And so they hired me, and I was only 14 years old, and I worked for them all summer. And I didn't go to summer camp. I didn't go play with the other ones because I didn't mix with them.
Right. And so part of the distinction is you're assessed based on your abilities and your usefulness rather than your age.
Yeah.
And because liability and various laws would stop that, but that helps you understand that you're an adult because you're being helpful in developing useful skills.
Well, I think it's more who are you comfortable with? If you at your age went back to grammar school and you were the adult and they were all kids but you were in the same class, you wouldn't necessarily mix with them very well. I mean, you would because we all like kids, but that isn't your peer group.
I always hung out with people twice my age.
Yeah. That's the thing. That's where I was. I hung out with the farm workers that worked on the farm with the tractors and stuff.
Right.
And so that's what I leaned towards and stayed with.
How old are you today?
76. Next week or 2 weeks I'll be 77.
Right. Yeah. So talking to you is much more interesting to me than talking with most of the people I could talk with, which is why, one of the interesting things that I think perpetuates dysfunctional aspects of our culture is people will say things or know things, And I'll say, that's a good point, let's get it on camera. And it's like, no, I don't want to be seen being or saying or thinking what I be, say, and think.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can you have a culture that functions this way, but seeks to appear this way?
Yeah.
You can't grapple with it until you're willing to be seen
Right.
as you actually believe and function. And so there's nothing that I believe or feel is important or have an opinion on that I wouldn't want known,
Yeah.
because
How's it going, you guys?
Good.
Is that your dog?
No, it's his dog.
Guess you're doing a little video or
we're
something?
doing
Yeah. You want to interview me?
He's got a lot of good stories.
I know, it's a gold mine.
He's a gold mine of stories, yeah. I'll be back in and out a couple times.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's an odd, it's a very, I think it's a big problem, because if people won't say what they really think and feel, nothing's perfect. No paradigm, no thought, no system of belief is perfect. So if you're intelligent, like my beliefs grew when I went to Denmark,
Yeah.
because I had a set of assumptions that proved to be completely wrong in that environment. Because my country and everyone had told me that if, that there's no such thing as a free lunch, and
Putting air purifiers in every room.
What?
Putting air purifiers in
Oh, neat.
every office, yeah.
All right.
Just to give the clients a little more confidence.
Ah, okay.
so, I love discovering things that tell me that my operating system is wrong, because it's a chance to grow.
Well, I subscribe to that. I'm always looking at the opposition's political viewpoint to see if I can agree with it. I
Yeah.
haven't, but I keep trying to.
Who's your opposition?
Well, I'm a very conservative. I'm a conservative. I'm a conservative in a county where everybody's a liberal, and so I don't.
We voted for Schwarzenegger, though, didn't we?
Your pardon?
I guess the county, yeah, but so the state, Schwarzenegger was Republican.
He was.
wasn't he?
He was. Yeah.
And the state voted for him, but did Marin County vote for Schwarzenegger?
I doubt it, but they might have. But I watch CNN, NBC, and those other programs more than I watch Fox News, because I know what Fox News says,
Yeah.
but I want to see what's wrong with my thinking.
Right.
And I can't change my mind. I haven't found it yet.
Right. Well, I think some of it is contextual, because I don't know for sure if in America, if we institutionalize the exact same programs as in Denmark, I don't know for sure if in 10 years, if I interviewed random 30 Americans, they would all love their jobs, love their country, be working.
No, I
And-
don't think so.
But it's not an issue of DNA. This is a cultural thing.
Yes.
And so and that's my biggest interest, is what's a culture that takes its people, its most valuable assets, and turns them in to highly intelligent generators of personal and national well-being. Because if you have one culture that takes 50% of its citizens and makes them miserable and dysfunctional, and you have another culture that takes 98% of its citizens and makes them talented, functional, happy, and cooperating with other people, that is a superior culture by its outcome. And you can't necessarily, there have been 10,000 cultures in human history, according to anthropologists, and every culture is different, So it's hard to say an objective, this culture is right and wrong on all things, but you can measure this culture takes X amount of energy, time, money, natural resources, human beings, and produces this amount of well-being. And this other culture did this, this, and this, and produced this amount of well-being. And we're pretty high in, you could say that this is a very luxurious culture in some ways. But it's also, luxury does not translate into felt human well-being in many instances.
Mhm.
Meaning, I'm at a 4 out of 10 in anxiety on many days. I don't need any more luxury, but I could easily do with a life where I was a 1 in anxiety rather than a 4.
Uh-huh.
And in my experience, working harder or making more money does not affect most of that anxiety.
Yeah.
It's about relationships and things. Like I don't want, I was looking for a piece of lighting that I wanted to bring to this interview. And I saw it a week ago. Where is it?
Yeah.
Well, I don't want you to think that I'm keeping you waiting. And so I'm anxious. I can't find it. So I eventually say, well, screw the lighting. I'll just come.
Yeah.
But that problem wouldn't be solved with more money or a bigger house or something.
Sure.
That's just, we're an impatient culture in general.
Yeah.
And so I'll have that anxiety here. In Thailand, where I spend a lot of time, they're very relaxed around boundaries and time. So if I'd been doing this interview in Thailand, I would not have been anxious because I knew they wouldn't take offense. And so these are cultural things. And where have you, so you've been to Denmark, where else have you traveled and what has stood out for you around the world?
Well, I went to Thailand with a guy that was he was from Mill Valley. He was the bureau chief of the FBI, CIA, I guess it was CIA in Thailand, and so he was a covert kind of guy, and in Thailand I don't know what they call it, but I think it's like the chief of staff or something like that is higher than the generals and admirals. They have his job is to protect the king.
Mm-hmm.
And so they make him higher than the generals and higher than the military.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was his job, and that was his his other side. And so to be his guest would be like being Al Capone's guest.
Mm-hmm.
And we were really treated royally. So what was my impression of Thailand? It was an unusual. It was very different because of the things that he exposed me to there, and the places that he took me, and the things that we did. My bedroom in the Dusatani Hotel, bigger than this whole lobby.
Yeah.
We've got the bed over in the corner, and the marble floors. I mean, it was gorgeous. So I was very impressed with that. I was very impressed with the clogs. Where they go by boat up to all of the villages that are served off the river with no roads.
Right. The longboats.
Yeah, longboats. Yeah, with a big motor.
Yeah. I love doing that. My hotel that I like the most is right on the Chao Phraya River.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I like is they have both free and inexpensive, and the longboats are the most expensive. But still, for $30, you can go for an hour driving around on those longboats. It's fun.
Right. They actually got elephants walking along the shore, and people riding elephants, and that's quite different. So you was asking what did I think of the different places that I've been? Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, like when you go to a place, do you think you compare it, benefits and negatives compared to your
No,
culture?
I never think of that.
I
No,
see.
no, what I do is just try to see their culture and see how they're, I mean, I guess it is comparison, but trying to identify how different they are. For example, in Thailand, that was, he was also deputy chief of staff of the Kuomintang. You know that group?
I don't know the Kuomintang.
Kuomintang was a guerrilla army that fought the communists in Laos and Cambodia and all that.
I see.
And a lot of war stories and brutality and all that. So that was something I've never been exposed to before. And not that I would want to. I mean that wasn't a highlight or a low light. It was just informative. It was like watching a war movie and seeing the actual players. But the places that I liked were Fiji. I love Fiji. If you go to Hawaii, that's different than San Francisco. Fiji's way more Hawaii than Hawaii, and it's really further south seas.
Yeah, I went to Hawaii. I didn't feel any cultural difference.
No, right,
But
no.
in Thailand, I really feel it.
Yeah.
And what I notice is, because I started traveling when I felt I was pushing up against the cultural boundaries in the U.S.
Mhm.
And I thought, I wonder if there's a place anywhere in the world where I could easily have experiences that are valuable that I would never have in the US, or would have like 1% of the time, but there we might have it 70% or 80%.
In Japan.
Japan. But what I was interested in was quality time and emotional warmth. And spontaneous time. Spontaneous quality time was warmth. And in the Bay Area, if I call 10 of my friends and say, let's get together today for an open-ended something, 95% of the time, their response is, it used to be call me, now it's text me next week.
Yeah.
So that's a 95% statistic.
Yeah.
Now, if I go to Thailand, I would say 70% of the time,
Mhm.
complete strangers
Yeah.
will say, sure,
Yeah.
let's do it, right now. Now, that has nothing to do with skill. It has nothing to do with laws. It has everything to do with the American obsession with efficiency and time management,
Yeah.
and the Thai obsession with courtesy, responsiveness, and enjoying life. And so my well-being goes up 350% to 400% when I'm in Thailand.
Yeah.
My living expenses go down 350%.
Yeah.
So that's a 700% return on investment
Yeah.
if the goal is to feel good with this least amount of cost.
Yeah.
And
Well, it makes me wonder why come back here then.
laws
Yeah.
and money.
Okay.
Meaning I can get a 2-month visa,
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
If I pay $15,000, I can get a 5-year kind of A+ visa, they call it, or whatever, just for people that. And they're incredibly anal about businesses. I mean, they really torture foreigners who want to start companies there.
They don't want that, huh?
Well, here's an example. If I want to start a restaurant, first thing I have to do is commit to hiring 5 Thais for every foreigner. So if me and my wife are foreigners,
Yeah.
I have to commit to hiring 10 Thais, whether I need them or not. Number 2, I have to hire Thais for anything that a Thai person can do. Number 3, if I'm caught delivering a plate of spaghetti in my restaurant to the customer,
That's their job, right?
I get fined and my restaurant can get shut down.
Yeah.
Number 4, if the ties don't show up for work, which many of them don't,
Yeah.
then I'm still punished for doing the job they haven't shown up to do. So that's a level of stupidity and insanity that I don't want to deal with.
Yeah.
So I don't want to run a business there.
Yeah.
But I haven't yet saved up enough at 45 where I could just, well, one, there's a visa problem. How do you get a visa? But then 2, just retire there for the rest of my life. But I suspect if I had $1 million in a 401k that I would be living there.
Have you tried New Zealand?
That's a good place. Just tasting it by meeting Kiwis. I like
Yeah.
the New Zealand people. But
Our experience in New Zealand was we were staying in bed and breakfasts, and we rented a car and we were traveling around, and we picked up some hitchhikers, like a couple of American girls, and they said, "You're missing it all." They said, "Park the car and hitchhike." Well, yeah, try it. So we hitchhiked and we got picked up by people, and every one of them invited us to come home with them for dinner and stay over and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they're just really hospitable people.
how wonderful.
Yeah, that was really, really nice.
And how wonderful that you availed yourself of that experience.
Yeah. No, well, they convinced us. I mean, that we didn't think at first that we're grown. We don't think we're hitchhikers, but we're glad that we did.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny. Just a quick funny story. It was, they have, like in Hawaii, they have those flash rain flood things that happen when the downpours are real severe. And so my girlfriend and I, my girlfriend of 40 years, long time girlfriend, but so we were hitchhiking and somebody dropped us off outside of town, and there's no cars coming along. And the rain clouds came and started looking like it was going to storm, and it did storm. And then a car went by, but it went by the other direction, but we were going that way, it was going that way, and that was the only one in some time. And then it was really pouring, so we unpacked our sleeping bags, and we stood up, because the ground's soaking wet, so we stand up in the sleeping bag upside down, with zippers, so that if a car does come by, you can unzip it real quick and stick your thumb out, otherwise you're in a tent inside your sleeping bag. Well, then we got thinking, well, but she's on that, one go on one side of the road, one go on the other side, because then we got a better chance of getting picked up by somebody and taken somewhere where it's dry. Well, they stopped for her, so I ran and got in with her, and this old couple took us home. And he insisted that we go take a shower, take a bath. He'll have dinner ready for us, all that stuff. And then what he wanted to do was take us on tour. We were at Christ Church, so he wanted to take us to tour of Christ Church, which he did. And then stay the night. Okay, so we stayed the night. Next morning he has breakfast for us, and he wants to take us on this tour. So okay, but then at the end of the day we were going to leave. No. He had something else he wanted to stay. So we ended up staying with him for several days, and when we left, we pried ourselves away, and he was upset that we were leaving. Mm-hmm. And that's the hospitality that you have.
Well, thank you for telling me that, because I've never experienced that.
Yeah.
And I would enjoy experiencing that. And you're telling me that New Zealand has a way higher odds of that experience.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to a level of cultural intelligence. That intelligence is how efficiently can you create well-being with a given set of resources. And we're social human beings, and so feeling welcome and a sense of belonging is often going to bring about more well-being than whether you have 1 million or 3 million. And so that's a great experience, and it encourages me to go to New Zealand, so thank you.
Well, the disappointment in New Zealand was that it wasn't that different than here. West Marin and New Zealand look the same.
Yeah.
But they have different, there's some things that are interestingly different. Here we have our cowboys of the Old West that would ride the horses and wrestle the steer to the ground. There they have helicopters. They hunt in the helicopters, but they jump out of the helicopter onto the deer.
Ah, I see.
And they catch them live.
Ah,
And that's pretty rugged, to chase a deer and then
and
jump out of the helicopter
onto it.
and they do it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, pretty rugged.
You really want your chaps to be
Yeah,
well padded.
yeah. So the places that I liked were Fiji and we liked New Zealand because of the people. And Japan was a different culture, altogether different culture. And
Yeah,
don't know if that culture-
I found very little when I went to Narita Airport, and then I walked around the surrounding areas. No one spoke English.
No one spoke English, right?
For the longest time, I couldn't find anything but every restaurant had the same 10 Japanese dishes.
Yeah.
And then finally I found a few like Thai places or something. And then of course I loved the temple and just how much rock and stuff that was near there, and the way that their graveyard was kind of like built. They're huge walls. It's like every stone was a grave, so it must have been like ashes or something like that.
Mhm.
Anyway, I really enjoyed that. But my favorite place so far overall is Thailand.
No, I like Thailand. I definitely did. And Prashad came to the United States, and he looked us up, and we took him around, and spent the day with him, took him to Pier 39 in the city and all that, and kept in touch with him. He wrote a book. He wanted me to try to see if I couldn't get it published for him, but I didn't know anybody. I made some copies and sent them around. I don't know whatever happened to that.
It's very difficult to translate Thai into English and vice versa.
Well, he had he spoke English, but he had it needed editing. Every page needed lots of editing, but it was English words in there, out of context, but it was there. The other well, see, the reason that we traveled so much was because the airlines have what they call the interline agreement, which is an agreement where anybody from one airline, the crew, can fly on another airline anytime for free, right? They change it back. Well, that applies also to the owners of the airports and the airport boards, the managers and the upper management. Well, it also applies, surprisingly, to heliports. And I own the San Rafael heliport. And so we got that travel advantage. So we would go to the, we're gonna have a few days off, we'd go to the airport with a heavy coat and a bathing suit and just get on the next plane wherever it went. And then when we got there, if we didn't like it, we'd get on the next one from there. So we went all over the world that way.
Is that courtesy still in effect?
Yeah, it's called the agreement is called the Interline Agreement,
I see.
and it's still in effect. Yeah.
Wow. So all you need is a heliport to.
Well, all you need is a heliport, or you become a steward or a stewardess, or somebody in. It has to be on a flight related. I don't think a mechanic can get it.
Right.
Hey,
How are you?
Hey.
Friend?
Yeah.
Enjoying the good sun?
Yeah.
So then, as we come back to, and do you fly? Yeah, helicopter?
No, I'm just right. I'm a good rider.
So where is the heliport? I haven't seen it.
It's the end of Grange Way in San Rafael. What happened is some people approached me to build a commercial heliport, and they were going to sign the lease, and all we had to do was get the approval and build it, and it was good rates and everything. So we got all of that, but at the very end, the Centerville planning director saw in her wisdom that they were gonna limit the number of flights. We're gonna be limited to, I think, 7 or 8 flights a day. And the operator that had put up all the money and time, I mean, I put up the money, but I mean, they put up a lot of, they spent a lot of money in it too. Took a couple of years into getting the approvals and getting through FAA and everybody. And in the end, he couldn't make it at that, so I didn't build a commercial heliport. But then a lady came along and bought it, and made a lot of money on it, but I had to sell it. But it was approved for a commercial heliport, that's all I needed. and I can join you on it. But Cindy, that guy that just left, he's my dispatcher. When you call to order a debris box, that's who you talk to.
I understand. And so, what do you see as the different, I mean, I look at Denmark and little or no homelessness there,
Yeah.
understandably, and I look at Thailand, little or no homelessness there.
Yeah.
And then I look at Marin and growing numbers of homeless.
Yeah.
What would you say is the recipe? Because it's not just one thing. If we were a culture that felt ashamed of laziness, like the Japanese do, rather than
Back to peer pressure, isn't it?
yeah. So culture is a big part of it, but housing costs are a big part of it. Like, why did I own 2 houses up on Whidbey Island, and then come down here and say these homes are uglier and 4 times the price and 10 times the hassle to get a permit? I don't want to deal with this.
Well, I saw an interesting, there's a local architect, Jim Ring, you know Jim?
I don't know.
Well, this 20 years ago, he did a presentation. We were supposed to talk about affordable housing. And he said, well, I'm here to talk about affordable housing. And I want to tell you why housing is so expensive in Marin. And I'll give you an example. He said, when a contractor moves onto a site, he's going to start a house, what's the first thing he's got to get? Well, he's got to get a telephone, you know, a job phone for the cell phone. He's got to get a water meter. He's got to arrange for a sewer hookup and know that he's going to get it, and so on and so on. He says, so let's just talk about the water meter. He says, I bought this water meter made by American Standard or whoever it was at Jackson's, and it cost $275. And I can put it in myself, and that's what I'm into it for. I bought this water meter, but incidentally, I can't use that water meter. I have to get the one from the water district, and here's the one that I got from the water district. And it's $14,000. $275, $14,000. That's just right off the bat. And then I have to have the electricity extended down to my job site, and that's going to cost $40,000. I could dig the trench and put some wire in the trench for $2,000, but it's going to cost that, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Then the permits, and the fact that it takes more time for the consultants, more consultants' time goes into building a house than a carpenter's time to build it.
Yeah. If, like, Elon Musk can build a factory
Yeah,
in China
yeah,
in 1/3 of the time it'll take me to get a permit for one house
yeah,
here.
that's right, that's right.
From groundbreaking to making Model 3s in China, 11 months there.
Yeah,
And I'm advised when I go in, they call it planning and community development. It should be called harassment and discouraging community.
yeah, right.
Because the office has never created a single community,
No,
and they haven't done a single development.
that's right.
But they have slowed down and raised the price of every development that's gone there, and they have made community illegal.
Yeah,
Because when I looked at the obvious solution, I interviewed a bunch of homeless people and stuff, and when you understand you know, like as I say, I pay $4,000 for housing here, and I pay $150 a month in Thailand, and I like it more there. I'd rather be in the 140 house than in the 4,000 house. What occurred to me is that, and this ties in with your work a little bit, how many thousand tons of usable building materials get thrown away every year in Marin, do you think?
I knew that figure, but I don't remember it right now, but it's
100,000
oh yeah,
tons?
100,000 tons easily,
Yeah.
Yeah, but the problem is that we also have labor codes, and we also have OSHA, and we also have all those other things, minimum wage laws, and no gig workers, and all that kind of stuff.
Every single one of these, though, increase the cost of housing.
Every single one of those eliminate the ability to reuse that material.
Right, which increase the cost of housing.
Increase the cost
And
of housing.
increases the cost of waste.
Yeah.
And increase the cost of, or the environmental costs of natural resources.
Yeah.
Because every intelligent solution that I've been able to find is illegal in Marin.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is there is, like I find it hilarious, that if I disturb a patch of grass in a wetland,
Yeah.
someone representing the interests of that patch of grass
Yeah.
can call multiple offices,
Yeah.
and there will be cars rushing down to
Oh, yeah.
shut me down within hours
You betcha. And they'll have fines for you that you
Oh,
don't
fines.
lose.
to protect a 2-foot patch of grass.
That's right.
Now, there is no one I can call to protect a human life. I can say, there's a 78-year-old woman here. She has dementia. She's wet. She's cold. Do something. That's not our department.
That's not our department, right?
A piece of grass is more valuable
That's right.
than an elderly woman's life.
That's right. And they probably have bigger budgets in those departments than you do in the police department.
Sure. And what I like in Thailand also is that law is somewhat contextual. What I mean by that is the police in Thailand actually want to know what's going on in the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's more of a conversation. When I've watched incidents with the police, they'll say, what's going on, and what's going on, and why are you doing this, and this, and this, and this. And they're kind of interested in a good outcome for all people. They're not interested in the rigidity of the law. Over here, I remember flying back from Thailand on an 18-hour flight. I felt really sleepy on the drive back on 580.
Mm-hmm.
It was 2 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
There was not a car in sight.
Mm-hmm.
I pulled over on the highway
Mm-hmm.
to take a 20-minute nap
Yeah.
off of the highway.
Yeah.
10 minutes later, a police car drives up and says, move along. And I said, I'm very tired, and I think I'll drive much safer after a 20-minute nap.
Uh-huh.
He said, that's none of my concern. Move along. Now, in Thailand, where there's 1,000 times more traffic,
Yeah.
going 5 different ways on one road, you could probably sit in the middle of the road for 5 hours, and people would just drive around and assume that you had something to do.
Yeah, right.
And it, again, shifted my perspective that we like to say we're a rule of law. We're a country with the rule of law. But one could also say we are a country of inane stupidity applied regardless of intelligence. This is the way it is, whether it makes any sense or not.
That's right.
And we pride ourselves of treating someone like that police officer would treat me the same way if I was blocking traffic on a major intersection as if I'm 2 a.m. and there's no one in sight and I'm on the side of the road.
Right.
He's just doing his duty to apply the law. But I'm interested in how you would think, given our bureaucracies in place, what's the easiest path to eliminating homelessness in Marin?
Take the incentive away remove the incentive to be homeless.
Okay.
And that's pretty easy. And we talked a little bit about what they did in China. Now, I don't know what I told you, I don't know it to be true firsthand. I only know what I was told.
Yeah.
And
What was your source for that?
my secretary that went there.
Okay.
And she said that, you want me to repeat it?
Yeah.
Okay, so she said that there isn't unemployment in homelessness in China. There's dead people that won't comply, but there isn't homeless and unemployment because you can go to the government if you're hungry and you haven't got any money and you got no place to stay, and they will provide that for you. They'll provide you a job, and you can accept the job or reject the job. But if you accept the job, then that's your job, they pay you. You don't have to stay there any length of time. You can quit if you get a better job, and you can move on whenever you want. If you reject that job, it's okay. They'll give you another job, and they'll give you some money along the way, and a place to stay maybe. But you can take the second job, but you can't go back to the first job. You can't say, I'll go back to that first one. I don't want the second one. If you reject the second job, you get a third opportunity. If you reject the third opportunity, then there is no fourth opportunity, and you don't get any benefit. So at that point, you either have to take that third job, which maybe is way worse than the other two, but you have to take that job, or just go out in the street and starve. And they feel, and again, this is just her idea, they feel that if you do go out in the street and starve and die, that you kind of were, in their mind, a burden on their society anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what if you can't work? What if you can't work?
If you're in a wheelchair,
You're in a wheelchair.
You cannot speak.
Yeah, you cannot speak. Whatever it is, they'll find a job for you.
Okay.
If you, for example, let's say you can't speak, well, can you wash dishes?
Yeah.
Let's say that you can't, whatever. There's something you can do, and maybe it's just sitting in a chair there with the other people that are working and marking what time they came and left or something.
That's a good point. Now, do you know culturally if they shame people doing, because I know an American attitude would often be, well, I'm not just going to sit there and do this, whatever, and, do they have respect for someone in a wheelchair who can't speak, who's just marking time or whatever it is?
I don't know, because
Because that seems a key part of it, that's the cultural part of, are you, like in America, we look down on janitors.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of dumb because you should have a lot of respect for someone who's willing to work that hard to clean up your mess.
Yeah.
Do you have any shame around being involved with garbage and debris?
Not at all.
Do you get any of that message coming towards you as somehow that's not as prestigious as banking or something like that?
I don't think so. I mean, I haven't experienced it. I mean, everybody either likes me or doesn't like me. Most everybody does, so I don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I can't think of anybody that doesn't unless they're. I have filled wetlands before when you're talking about wetlands.
Yeah.
So the people that don't want that they don't like me, but that's okay.
Yeah. So your number one solution would be to give everyone so the 2,000 people or so in Marine who don't have a house
Give them a job.
would be to give them 3 jobs
Yeah,
or let them starve to death if they didn't want to do any of the 3.
yeah, and surprisingly, nobody starts to death.
Yeah. Well, I don't think most people would. And then,
Well, what does happen? Okay, so somebody takes that 3rd job, and it's not a very good job. And so now imagine that you're that person. It's back to incentive. Is your incentive to just say, this is my lot in life and I'm just going to stay here until I get too old or something and die? No, it's going to be to try to learn something that's going to get you a better job so you can get away from it. And that's pretty much what happens. I understand.
So they've got a kind of guaranteed 3 levels of falling, and then once they hook on at that 3rd job or 1st or 2nd job, they're welcome to go out and get another job that's better.
Anytime they want.
Yeah. Now, do the jobs, I mean, because the cost of housing in China is a pittance compared to the cost of housing in Marin.
Sure.
Meaning, you get that job, handicap marking someone's time, we give them $8 an hour minimum wage. They can't afford rent, and they can't afford to build or buy. It's an interesting fact. I own a piece of land in San Rafael, but it's in Marin County, and they told me it would take 3 years and $30,000 to get a permit.
Yeah.
And I thought it'd be nice to pay cash and build my house myself. So I said, well, tell you what, why don't I move onto the site? I'll put up a teepee or I'll put a shipping container for my tools. And I'll start building the house, and I'll pay cash for the house. They said, you can't do that. I said, I can't do anything on my own land? I said, no, not until you've built the house. And then I said, okay, I'd like to build a house like this. And they said, oh, you can't do that because we're interested in how the neighbors feel and all that in Marin and all that. And I said, well, I have great news. Here's a video interview from this neighbor. Here's a video interview from this neighbor. I met all my neighbors before I bought the land. And I said, well, how do you feel about this and this and this? And they said, well, we're not interested in your actual neighbors. We're interested in your hypothetical neighbors.
Yeah.
And we have determined what your hypothetical neighbors want.
Yeah.
So the fact that your neighbors want this, we're not interested. The fact that you want it, we're not interested. We're going to slow your project down for 3 years and take all this money. And now the price of a water meter is $50,000.
Yeah.
Just to get the hookup we could all do for
It'd
$500.
be a bad precedent to let you proceed without all that.
Yeah, and so I'm left with the fact that it will cost more time to build, to get a permit to build. That it will cost more to get a permit than many of the places I would like to build. And that they're going to make this as most difficult as possible.
Now, are you in the county or city?
County.
Yeah.
Now, but what I'm interested in is, from my perspective, that's why I haven't built. It's too irritating, and I feel mildly humiliated. It's kind of like you're being, let's see how many hurdles we can put you through.
Yeah.
Use your tax money to hire our jobs to harass you for no reason.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be one thing if they were actually caring about my neighbors,
Yeah.
but they weren't.
Yeah.
It'd be one thing if they were caring about the environment, but they're not. If I build a tiny house, the fire department doesn't have to put out a big house. The neighbors don't have to have the street tied up for 2 years building the big house.
Yeah.
Everyone wins, but it's against the law.
Yeah.
They say, oh no, you have to build at least 1,200 square feet.
Yeah,
Why?
Yeah, why?
Why?
I mean, what 1,200 feet?
I would rather build 300 square feet, settle in, and then maybe build another 200 square feet in a few years. Be better for the neighbors, better for me. I could pay cash for it. Can't do it. Why? So this gets into the contrast between Marin and Thailand. Every single one of these things that I would want to do, there isn't a soul that would stop me in Thailand. Why am I more free in Thailand as an American to build and live in a house than I am in my own country? I put more weight on that based on the fact that that's the only reason I haven't built a house here than I do on the job incentives. Because every homeless person I've interviewed has a minimum of $300 that they pay a month towards a house. And most of them have more. But they don't have close to what is legally buildable or livable. And I'm curious, do you have any, because as a conservative, usually it goes both ways, meaning you're not as big on entitlements, but you're not as big on government interference in people's right to live.
I'm not, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I'm basically told that I can't do anything that I want to do on my house, on my own land.
Well, then you might be a conservative too then.
Well, my point is, are you, in your solution, what policies do you see as destructive for the kind of, for eliminating homelessness in Marin County?
What policies do I see as destructive? And it goes back to what I said before, the entitlements. If the incentives, not the entitlements, the incentives. If the incentives are there where you can make more money or you can live better.
Well, that's the one, yeah, that's the one side of it.
Yeah, well, it's not even more money. It's not even more money. If you can support yourself by not working, why would you work? Certain people would work just because either they, it's pride, maybe. If some of them still have that, I don't know if they do anymore. Certainly the Japanese do.
They do.
And
the Thai do.
honor. It's an honor thing.
There's a few disabled Thai people I've seen selling kind of national bingo kind of things for raise money for their church and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But no one's begging. No one.
Right.
And so what do you think is part of the American cultural recipe that's creating that entitlement? Because that's part of what leads to homelessness. If you raise a generation of people to be entitled, and then they're waiting around for their entitlements, and then they don't come, some of them are going to be homeless because they've been indoctrinated into believing that it's the government's job to do something for them, but the government isn't doing it. Then they're waiting rather than working. And so, the way I look at this is kind of like a circle. On the one hand, everything that raises the cost of housing contributes to the problem.
Right.
If it's by law, I have no problem with a billionaire building a billionaire home.
Yeah.
But I do have a problem. I have worked out that it is illegal to build less than a $600,000 home in Marin.
Yeah. I don't think you could build.
You couldn't follow all the laws
No. You couldn't.
and do less than 600,000. Now, the sociological data says that 10% of the people born in Marin are not going to be able to afford 600,000.
Mm-hmm.
Even with mandatory employment at market rates and all that.
Yeah.
So where do you, I haven't heard you speak in any way about, you talked about your island idea.
Yeah.
Presumably, the people living there wouldn't have had to pay $600,000 for a home.
No.
Yeah,
You know how much they paid?
how much?
I think it was around, I don't remember, but I'm gonna say it was $500. And why is it $500? Now, this is in PG. It's $500 because 4 men row out there in a boat, and then they stay there, and they fish, and they catch their fish, and they got their pineapples and stuff like that. And it takes 4 men 1 week to build one of those buoys,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Well, I was talking about your local island that you're talking about for the landfill and bowling alley and stuff.
You mean down in East Santa Fe, by the wetland, you mean, area?
What was that island? Crag Island? Scrag Island?
Oh, Skaggs Island.
Skaggs Island, yeah.
Skaggs Island. Yeah. It was called an island, but it's really a marsh. But,
Okay.
But it had hundreds of houses.
Yeah. So we spent millions tearing those down, apparently.
None was tearing them down.
And your idea was to have low-income housing there.
Yes.
And stuff.
And a job for everybody there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's a great
And
idea.
recycling.
Yeah.
And all that. Yeah.
That's a terrific idea.
Yeah.
Now, how much would those houses have cost for people who wanted to live there? And
Nothing. Yeah, nothing.
So my bet is that if that project existed,
Yeah, today, you mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
that any vacant houses there would be filled.
Oh, absolutely. You wouldn't have filled them.
Yeah.
But the only thing was, is the environmentalists wanted it, the marsh people wanted it to be reverted back to original marsh.
Uh-huh.
And that was the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
They were stronger.
Right.
Barbara Salzman. And there's a few folks that are very strong, very influential in that.
Right. So you would change the incentive program by, now how would you do that in Marin? Because one of the things like we talked about, like if I give out a business card as I'm driving by instead of cash,
Yeah.
people don't call in general for a job.
Right.
Because they're making more money panhandling.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of the 2,000 in Marin that are panhandling, meaning if I drive through San Rafael, which is the center, I might see on average 7 at any given moment, 7 people panhandling.
Yeah.
What are the other 2,000 doing?
I mentioned that my girlfriend was she worked for the methadone. She was the director of the methadone Central Hospital, at the dispensary, and she's an RN with a master's degree, and she's not a user or anything like that. She's a Florence Nightingale. She wants to help people and help people get off drugs and all that kind of stuff. Right up her alley. Now, every day driving back to Marin, she goes by a whole bunch of the homeless that are panhandling along the road. She knows them all. She knows them all very well. They're not poor. They panhandle. That's the way they make their living. And the thing that I didn't know was that some of them have kids. Those kids are rented. I didn't know that. That you can have my kid because you gotta give me something. But you take my kid and you'll get more handouts.
I see. Who rents them, the kids?
The panhandlers. They have a. They're standing at the stoplight and they're pathetic enough. But if they're holding the kid, you'll give them money.
But who do they rent the kids from?
Oh, just from other folks.
Other panhandlers?
Yeah, other panhandlers.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
But again, you haven't touched on cultural changes because this doesn't happen in Japan. It doesn't happen in Thailand.
Yeah. No, cultural changes. Well, it depends on whether you believe what Gorbachev said, whether you believe that there is an influence, a secret influence, of however it's done, to conquer from within, as he said.
But the US CIA is undermining regimes around the world all the time as well.
Absolutely.
But the CIA is active in almost every country in the world.
Absolutely.
But some of those countries are not unable to house their people, etc.
No, but is the CIA, this is the difference though, is the CIA undermining those countries to set up American regimes in those countries for America? Are they making them a state or a territory of the U.S.? Or are they just trying to get rid of communism or some other form of government that would be threatening to us?
Well, some other form that is threatening to us, there's been a lot of including toppling of democracies, that whatever are viewed as threats. But I don't believe personally that other countries' influence is as significant an impact around homelessness as our own hierarchy of values and beliefs.
Well, but there's where it has to start. If you're going to undermine the way America was,
Yeah.
that's the very thing you have to attack first.
The values and beliefs.
Values and beliefs.
Well,
And you do that through the schools, and you do that through
Yeah.
propaganda, and you do that through, I don't know, who knows, Black Lives Matter, I don't know if that has anything to do with anything. I've always, admired, and I have a lot of friends that are black, but look what they're doing now. So who's inciting all that? Do so many people stand up and fight for that? Because, what's driving them? I don't know. I don't know what it is.
well, I think that in the same way that I feel angry and humiliated by the Marin County Planning Department,
Yeah.
that I believe I would feel 5 times more humiliated if I was black and stopped and frisked.
Yes.
and stuff. So I think,
They got some legitimacy to their complaint.
well,
Yeah.
I have no doubt
Yeah.
that if I was black in the average circumstances of many black people in our culture, that I would feel 5 times more upset than I do about things like Marin Planning Department controlling my house.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they have legitimate things to be upset with. And then it's also, we tout our freedom of the press. It's not intelligence of the press, it's freedom of the press.
Right.
So we have a lot of freedom to get ratings.
Mhm.
But we don't use that freedom to really capture the complex nuances of both sides of the story.
Mhm.
And I'm interested in those nuances. I'm interested, I know you've got to be good at a lot of things to run your company and grown your resources over 60 years.
Mhm.
So I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican. I'm interested in those skill sets
Right.
and those
Yeah.
techniques. Now, if you had a free hand
Mhm.
around everything in Marin, like you must own land, etc.
Sure.
Now, how would you go about solving, as I say, my interview data says that every one of the people I interviewed would be in a home if they could be in a home for $300 to $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
And all the codes in Marin say that nothing can be built that cheaply.
No, that's right.
But the first thing I would start would be a park with tents where I would pick amongst the homeless. I would hire them to be their own security guards.
Yeah.
There's some that have that competency and could do a good job.
Yeah.
I would say, your job is to see that no one gets raped,
Mhm.
stolen from,
Mhm.
molested, shouted at in this camp.
Right.
And that every single person in this camp has a safe, legal place put a tent,
Mhm.
goes to the porta potty, rather than, anywhere. And, a field could manage, have you heard of Dunbar's number?
No. Oh, wait. What is it again?
Dunbar's number was the number that a sociologist named Dunbar discovered was the limits of the human brain to track and really know a group of people.
Okay.
Basically what he said is the human brain cannot intimately know more than 150 people.
Oh.
So,
Reasonable.
So if you want to know the kind of things that create respect and flow and value, like their names of their kids, their birthdays, their culture, their ideas, that they have been in a motorcycle accident, you don't hit them on the shoulder because it hurts them, all the nuances that create a good rapport, you cannot learn that amount of stuff about more than 150 people.
Mhm.
As a result, when you mingle in groups of like 500 people,
Mhm.
by definition, you are mingling without clear visibility. You're gonna step on emotional, social toes because you don't know the other person.
Right.
So the Dunbar's number basically says that sociological groups function way better, whether it's a company, for example, Gore-Tex breaks its divisions down in 150 people. So even though it's a $1 billion company,
Yeah.
as soon as it gets to 150 people, they'll start a new division. Because what the owner discovered was that as his company was growing past 150,
Yeah.
the culture of intimacy and warmth and good rapport broke down
Mhm.
and became more entitled, more defensive, more this. So he now segments his divisions into 150 people. They all know each other, collaborate, work together. So my idea is groups of low-cost housing that are 75 to 100, on average size. So we're not pushing that number.
Mhm.
Central cooking, meaning 3 or 4 kitchens,
Yeah.
central office and meeting spaces and
Sure.
stuff, and then 100 to 200 square feet sleeping quarters.
Mhm.
And every person, in order to participate, contributes 4 hours a day to the well-being and upkeep of the community, cooking, cleaning, gardening, all that. Spends 4 hours taking care of themselves, and then works doing something useful to society 4 hours a day.
Mhm.
That 4 hours a day useful to society for such a low-cost footprint, a couple hundred square feet per person.
Yeah. You'd be like a cruise ship.
Yeah, that kind of thing, yeah. And I would interrupt those thousands of tons a year of building materials
Yeah.
to lower dumping costs
Mhm.
and increase access to free building materials. And they could each build their own home following any of 100 different templates.
Mhm.
Meaning I'd have an engineer and an architect break down 100 different templates to say if you've got pallets, and you want to make something out of good pallets, here's how you can create something that meets the standard for our weather, in this. If you've got, insulation from sofas being thrown away, here's how you can minimize heat impact. Here's how you can do this and this. Basically create recipes that you don't need to go out and get separate permits and separate engineering reports for each one. You say, if you want to do heating in any way of these 50 ways, here it is, do it.
Yeah.
You pick the one that works.
Yeah.
If you want to get electricity in here, if you don't want any electricity,
Yeah.
if you want to just sleep in this place and be dry,
Get a solar panel. Yeah.
no electricity, do it.
Yeah.
And so I would implement areas, and then Elon Musk is doing this thing with tunnels, where you studied the Boring Company?
No.
Well, he's decreased the cost of tunneling by to about 1 million a mile.
Uh-huh, that's good.
That's huge.
That's huge.
And he's also developed a technology that takes the dirt out of the tunnel and presses it so hard that it becomes almost as strong as fired bricks.
Wow, wow, that's interesting.
And so that's getting rid of his waste costs.
Yeah. And it becomes a product.
And it becomes a product, which he, by the way, says if anyone is doing a low-cost housing project, he will donate those bricks for free.
Good.
Otherwise, they're there. Now, I think of, like, it's so, land is so scarce in Marin. Why not, for example, run 2 of those tunnels 2 miles long under China Camp Mountains,
Mm-hmm.
and have one of the tunnels be a bike route from San Rafael into out by the bay.
Yeah,
No traffic, no transit accident, bike and walking only.
yeah,
So there's your 2 million for that.
right.
And then right next to it, another 2-mile tunnel, and have little 100-square-foot legal sleeping places.
Sure. What, is he boring anywhere? Are they doing it somewhere?
He just finished one for Vegas under their convention centers because they want to move throughout Vegas in his electric cars.
Oh, okay.
And electric doesn't produce pollution in the tunnels,
Yeah,
so there's no ventilation issues.
good.
And then he did a test tunnel from someplace in Tesla to SpaceX down in
Yeah.
Los Angeles. And he's basically doing proof of concept that you can do his type of tunneling for less money than an above ground
Highway, yeah.
highway or anything like that because of all the regulation and stuff, because there's no regulation underground. And you can have crisscrossing tunnels 20, 30, 40 feet deep, as deep as you want.
Yeah, right.
And there's no limit. And you're protected in earthquakes. But for example, $4 million would see 4 miles of tunnel under unused land,
Yeah,
accessing bicyclists, etc., to the beach. You can have solar arrays and LED lights at the entrance of the tunnel,
sure.
and fans.
Yeah.
And every person could have a QR code and a good behavior profile that if you're not a violent criminal and hurting anyone, that you've got a safe, legal place to sleep in the tunnel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You could have literally 2,000 sleeping berths.
Like in a beehive.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm not a perfectionist in the sense I just want to see ideas being considered that are better than the status quo. And I think that we have enough resources to do it, what Denmark is doing at a lower degree, to say that as a human being, you have access to a safe legal place to sleep as long as you're not hurting anyone.
Yeah.
And that you have access to soup and bread and salad
Mhm.
if, again, you're not hurting anyone.
Yeah.
Because one of the problems we see with the corona epidemic is we have sick people with poor immune systems hanging out without social distancing amongst the homeless community, and then radiating that out into the other community as they have. So we create a hub of disease.
Mhm.
That's not selfish, meaning no smart rich person would say, I'd like to create a breeding ground with thousands of people in my community who have lots of proximity, because they interact with each other more than anyone else.
Mhm.
And when they're stressed with PTSD and sick, they're going to catch it faster and spread it faster. But then they've got to interact with the community to buy food and stuff.
Mhm.
So then they can spread it from there.
Yeah, my daughter's not gonna come for Father's Day tomorrow because she's been exposed to some of the two people that are working sit right next door came down with him.
Oh, I see.
And I want to tell you one thing before I forget it. The Center Public Works Department called us up and wanted me to go up to a meeting up there with Marin Sanitary. So I went up there, and Gabriela was there, and I, and 3 or 4 people from the city, and they wanted to tell us that we can't put boxes on the street in San Rafael anymore. And we said, well, why not? And they said, well, because it requires an encroachment permit. An encroachment permit's $275. So we said, well, what's behind this? And they said, oh, it's, you know, this is not fundraising. This is necessary because we've had an ordinance for years that anybody that uses the streets has to have encroachment permit. Oh, okay. Well, why don't we change that? Well, no, we're not going to change that. We're not going to change it. Well, okay, let's take it apart. 60 years we've been doing it. We have 430 debris boxes. Marin Sanitary has probably almost the same. But they have thousands of these little 3-yard boxes.
Yeah.
So you could say together we've got at least 3,000 or 4,000 boxes that are in the streets. I mean, not always, but not all of them. But at any given time, there's 500 or 1,000 on the street somewhere. So, okay, so all those people have to get permits. Well, I could see where that's going to be, some money. The city's going to make some money, but is it really? Because what you have to do is you go down and you apply for a permit. Then you wait until it's approved, then an inspector comes out and looks to see where you can place it. Then you can only keep it there for 3 days. Then you gotta pick it up, then they're gonna inspect it, you got it taken away. And so the city's gonna have to build a bureaucracy around how to handle that. And then, what's the other side of it? What's the ill that it's trying to heal? Well, we've never had, and neither has Marin Sanitary, never had anybody run into a debris box. There's never been an issue with them. So if there's no issue, why the cure to a disease that doesn't exist? Now, here's the other side of it. If you don't provide for debris boxes, then people have to keep all their trash in their living room or someplace else, or on the lawn or whatever. And they're not going to keep as much as what's going to go in a box. They're just going to put some out there and run to the dump every other day. Well, that's going to be a lot more traffic. Nobody's getting hurt from putting debris boxes in, putting trash in debris boxes, but some number of those people are going to get in traffic accidents. And they're going to use up fuel and all that other kind of stuff. So why don't we take another look at this? No, we're not going to take another look at it.
Yeah. Well, that's as a conservative, you would push back against the creation of, because that's just pushed up the cost of housing, right?
Absolutely. But pushed up the cost of housing, and it's pushed up the stress level of the builder.
The stress level of everyone.
Of everyone.
Every single person. Now, that's why I'm interested in why you haven't changed the incentive on the government side. Because why do we have big government incentives?
Well, but that's why I'm a conservative. It's
Right.
That's what I want.
But in terms of solving the homeless problem, we have a homeless problem not just because the incentives of people not to work or whatever, but also because everyone is incentivized to raise the cost of housing who has a house, because they're selling it at some point, they're thinking of it in resale. Builders want the price of housing to go up because they have to get paid more.
Yeah.
Landscapers, the more codes there are on landscaping. Do you know about this double check valve thing?
Yeah. Crazy. Yeah.
So that increases.
About backflow devices
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and stuff.
So for a situation that I have never heard of once in my life, either in Thailand or anywhere else, it's that one thing raises the cost of a house in Marin by more than $1,000.
Yeah.
But there's 1,000 of those.
Yeah.
And so where do you see the solution to changing the incentives of governments to create new salaries for themselves by inventing new permits, new departments, and then coming up with ways to fund them that all increase the cost of housing? How do you change that incentive program to say that a government official gets 3 steps before they're out of government?
Well, there's a whole thing that somebody sent me on that. I'll be happy to forward it to you, but it has more to do with, the government shall pass no law that, such and such, all that.
How would you enforce that if you had some influence to?
Well, we have, the sad thing is that we have that influence. It's in our voting booth.
Mm-hmm.
And the other sad thing is that the people that support the status quo and want it to get more and more liberal are kind of the vocal ones, right? They're the ones that make conservatives not want to speak out because you're deemed a bad guy, you're attacked for doing it.
Mm-hmm. How much does that stop you, by the way? I know you were a little nervous about, being on camera and stuff. 1 out of 10, how much do you feel deterred from speaking your mind in our culture?
Well, let's put it this way. I'm not looking, I have got too much stuff going on to spend my time fighting.
Yeah.
So it's not that I'm afraid of a fight, it's not that I wouldn't fight, it's just that it's a waste of my time to fight. I gotta keep that place open.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more that than anything, but do I support the Conservative Party? Yes. Would I how many people would I tell that? Well, I'd lose half my 3/4 of my customers if that got real well known. And the other thing is that I've been interviewed a lot over the years, and some of the interviews are just, you never know the motive of the interviewer, right? And I know on one case there was a San Francisco Chronicle reporter that said he was making faces, and I thought that was weird. I said, I don't want to be rude, but why do you do that? And he said, well, it's to strengthen the facial muscles. And he says, try this, this stuff like that. And he's taking pictures of me when I did it. And he wrote a hit article. And I looked like a really bad guy in that article, so he was setting me up. So, okay, that's all right.
I see. Well, one of the fairest things that I know to do is to release media unabridged.
Yeah.
Because you can't, if you selectively edit and don't show the question but then clip the end, well, you can make people say just about anything.
Oh, absolutely anything.
But if you just say this is the entirety of the interview, this is what I think of it, but you watch it yourself. It's 2 hours long, whatever. You can't really set. That seems the fairest way to.
Well, fair, but is that what the media is after?
No, they're not.
They're not. They're not after fairness.
I'm not doing this to make money. I lose money talking to you.
Yeah, okay. As do we both.
Yes, we do both. But I am interested because, and so in the Chinese version of your story, what stops them panhandling? Because they're legally allowed to panhandle here.
Yeah.
So if they're offered 3 jobs and they say, no, I don't want to take money and make more money panhandling, how does that work in China?
I don't want a job. I will make more money panhandling, and I think I suppose that they probably can panhandle in China.
They can?
I don't know that, but I don't know whether they can or not. But I know that if they didn't accept that 3rd job, that's an alternative for them.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, the panhandlers here get a lot of other benefits. They get free cell phone, and they get I pay almost $400 or $500 a month for my Kaiser. They pay less than $100 or $50 or whatever it is. Everything. I don't get food stamps. They get food stamps. And on and on and on. They get all the bennies, and if the panhandling is just kind of spending money, I guess. And it can be significant, they can make a couple $100 a day, tax-free.
And $20 an hour was what one woman I asked how much
Yeah,
she made.
yeah, probably.
And
Unless she's carrying that baby, she
I
makes
see.
a lot more.
Now, there's no way that I know of to set up that low-class housing thing in Marin, whether, you know, the,
Well, there is. If you voted for if there was a politician that had the balls to run on a platform like that, and then you could say, well, he doesn't have the balls because he probably wouldn't win, unfortunately, because it's so entrenched. But if you could force him, if you could help him win, and if he did win, then you would have done the first step. And you know, I'm not trying to push for Trump, but he's far more along the lines of how I feel than the opposition. And you know, you can get tarred and feathered in the room for saying that. I think, you know, I think what happened, I think Trump, the biggest mistake that Trump may have made is he knew who his enemy was going to be, and he knew how he was going to attack it. And his enemy is going to be the press. He knew that. So therefore he attacked the press. He didn't do what would be maybe smarter, and that is to not recognize recognize that the press is going to be your adversary, and they're going to write bad stuff about you, but don't give them stuff to twist on you, and don't put a red flag in front of the bull. Pet the bull, feed the bull. And that's what I think a big part of his problem is. But I don't know. You know, that's a whole different thing. Is he doing the right thing? Well, the pipeline. When they did the Keystone Pipeline and some of those other opening up the oil wells and turning the Rust Belt around, those are all jobs. And I don't think they hurt anything when they were there before. I don't think they're hurting anything now that they're back. And I think the unemployment's down because of some of his policies. So that makes me a conservative. And I hear the other side of those arguments. Well, you could have an oil spill. Okay. We stopped all the oil exploration, and all those families went broke and hungry and all that. And then we got the oil from Alaska, and then the oil tanker collided, and there was a bigger oil spill than there ever had been in Texas, and so forth. You know, so I don't have all the answers. I just know that I reinforce my conservative thoughts by everything that I try to learn about why my thoughts are wrong, and I can't.
Well, there's certainly a confirmation bias that I think.
No, but I try not to be biased because I'm actively trying to understand the other
Well, what
side.
sociologists have said is that whatever your beliefs are, there is enough data in the world to support
Anything.
anything.
Yeah.
And that whether you're liberal saying that the same thing, that I try and read the other side and I try and come, I just can't find it.
Yeah.
Or whether you're conservative and you say, well, that generally, as humans, we need certainty before we need variety as a psychological need.
Okay.
And we gain more certainty by looking at those facts which confirm that we're right than looking at those facts that say that we may be out to lunch.
Yeah.
And there's enough facts out there that, given our very small lens of consciousness, we can easily go from fact to fact that supports us and just not dwell as much on the ones that challenge us. And
Well, but that doesn't apply to me because I don't look for something to support my thoughts. I look for something to not support my thoughts.
well, you should have at least 10 criticisms of Trump then?
Yeah, one of them is, I think strategically, he made a mistake going after, I think that was a mistake, going after the press.
Okay.
That's
So
one.
that's one mistake.
Okay. As far as how he supported the military, it made it appear that he's buying an army, but I don't know whether he was buying an army or he was righting the wrongs of the people that were trying to destroy the military.
I don't know either, but you must have at least 10 criticisms of Trump that are easy if you're looking for them.
Well, it's not so much that I look for criticisms of the people that I support, as much as I look for the wisdom of the people that are on the other side.
That's tough.
That's very tough. Well, no, it's not that tough. It's not that tough when you say, you gotta put the oil industry out of business. You gotta have a rust belt. You can't make steel because it pollutes. You shut down all the steel plants.
What I'm saying is it's tough to find wisdom on the other side. So I think it's easy.
Okay,
yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah, because I'm in the thing where it's a close call who I'm more annoyed with.
Yeah.
And so I have no problem rattling off 10 criticisms of Trump. I have no trouble rattling off 10 criticisms of Biden. My favorite was Andrew Yang. Did you?
No, I didn't.
Anyway, and there's obviously problems there. And then I have criticisms of the whole U.S. culture. All of my data leads me to look, and something you haven't talked about at all is there's a study called the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study.
Mm-hmm.
And there's basically 10 relatively common traumas from a close relative going in jail, being bankrupt, being verbally abused repeatedly by one or both parents, watching one or both parents be physically abused by another, addiction, public shaming, bullying, sexual molestation. There's 10 kind of things. And our culture is in relatively high levels of denial about one, how often that goes on for how many kids, and two, that it has a lifetime impact.
Mm-hmm.
And the ACE study looked at some tens of thousands of people and measured 1 to 10. Every one of those was 1 point, basically.
Yeah.
Now what they found is that people with 4 points on that score or more had a 5,000% higher chance of committing suicide.
Ooh.
Had had 300% more days in hospital over a lifetime. Had lower paying jobs. Had lower self-esteem. Were more likely to be depressed. Were et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that a lot of these things compounded, meaning they were more likely to seek help with a therapist, but simultaneously more likely to make less money than someone who hadn't had that highest score
Sure.
of the traumas. And so in our culture, if you are unfortunate enough to, let's say you've got a 6, one of your relatives was arrested, you were sexually abused, you were bullied at school, blah, blah, blah. You got a 6 on that score. You are put out into the culture with some degree of trauma, maybe even complex PTSD, that makes it harder for you to get a job. So you're going to get paid maybe half of what someone who has a 1 or a 0 score on that gets. But in order to get well with your half salary, you're going to have to do 3 times the amount of therapy at 100 and something an hour
Mm-hmm.
to try and figure out what's going on. Because in our culture,